Good evening and welcome to ILTV's Israel Weekly. I'm Aaron Porras, and with me today to discuss the latest in Israeli diplomatic and political developments, our former advisor to President Barak at Camp David and deputy to the mayor of Jerusalem, Teddy Kollek, Professor Moshe Amirav of Hebrew University, Jerusalem, and founder and executive director of Israel Institute for Strategic Studies, Dr. Martin Sherman. Our topics this evening include Marwan Barghouti's ongoing prisoner hunger strike and the thousands of newly approved homes in Jerusalem. But first, I'd like to touch on the recently made decision by Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas to stop footing Gaza's energy bill. The World Bank, among other international organizations, is calling the situation in Gaza a humanitarian crisis, as their insufficient infrastructure and lack of power leaves nearly 2 million people in the dark. PA President Abbas said he would take unprecedented financial moves against the coastal enclave and its Hamas rulers in an apparent effort to rein them into control from Ramallah. Hamas, which violently pushed Abbas's Fatah party out of Gaza in a 2007 coup, is firing back.
السلطة انها تنظر لقطاع غزة بالمنظور الصحيح انه قطاع غزة جزء لا يتجزأ من فلسطين. يعني بوجه رسالة للرئيس محمود عباس انه ينظر لا هنا في قطاع غزة انه احنا شعبك يا رئيس ابو مازن، واحنا احنا جزء من فلسطين يا ابو مازن، ويعني انظر لنا على الاقل بشفقة يعني.
ونعتبر أن هذه الخطوة هي جريمة ضد الشعب الفلسطيني وهي تساوق مع الاحتلال، ونحن نحذر بأنه إذا لم يرفع الحصار إما رفع الحصار أو الانفجار، والانفجار سيطال وسيكون بوجه الاحتلال الصهيوني، وسيندم كل من تمالأ مع الاحتلال من السلطة الفلسطينية وغيرها سيندم على هذه الخطوة، وأن حماس تملك خيارات متعددة لأجل الرد على هذه الجريمة لأننا ندافع عن شعبنا وعن حق شعبنا بالحياة.
So as we just heard, Hamas is threatening Israel and the PA with an explosion. How literally are we going to take these words, and how should Israel respond to this? Dr. Sherman, I'm going to start with you.
Well, you know, I remember with some irony that people said that Gaza was going to be the Singapore of the Middle East. And what you're seeing is a total collapse of this grotesque and macabre idea of two states. This is only one aspect of a much wider problem, because it's not only the power infrastructure that's collapsing in Gaza, it's water. Over 90% of the water is considered undrinkable at the moment. And many of the people depend on desalination, which depends on power. And if you've got no power, you won't have desalinated water, and therefore you will have no water to drink. And the same thing with the sewage. So what you're seeing is the total collapse of the two-state paradigm, which has not only failed to bring peace to the Jews, but it's failed to bring prosperity to the Arabs. And I think what we should take from this is to try and find an alternative paradigm which will completely replace the two-state solution, which keeps on producing situations that we've just seen. It's, you know, once it's the water, once it's the sewage, once it's the power. If you look at the latest polls run by Palestinian organizations, over half of the Palestinians of Gaza, the population of Gaza, have expressed a desire to emigrate permanently. And I suggest that we start facilitating the fulfillment of their desires rather than persist hitting our heads against a brick wall with a two-state solution. Because you can solve any particular local problem, but another one will eventually manifest itself. And as long as people persist with this imbecilic idea of two states for two people, we're going to have recurring tragedies like this, both for Jews and for Arabs.
How would you respond to that?
Yeah, I think the idea of two-state solution is exactly to solve this kind of problem, which is a crisis. I think Gaza is today in a crisis that we have to take responsibility for it.
What?
That's our closest neighbor. Whatever happens in Gaza affects Israel. If Gaza collapses, Israel is in a war.
So how is Israel supposed to respond to this? You know, and is there a future war on the horizon between Hamas and Israel, Hamas and the PA?
First of all, there is always a chance of another war with Gaza and with the Palestinians. We are in a permanent situation of crisis here. And the responsibility to Gaza is not only for the world or for the Palestinian Authority, it's also our responsibility. They are our closest neighbor. So what the Israeli army officers suggest for years is that we have to take responsibility not only in terms of war and how to conquer Gaza, but also to help them.
So that brings me kind of to my next question. You know, we have Gaza living on 4 hours or less of electricity per day, nearly 2 million people. What is Israel's responsibility? What should Israel be doing to help?
I'm absolutely astounded by Professor Amirav's response. You know, I brought 2 articles to the studio today, both written quarter of a century ago, predicting exactly what will happen if we leave Gaza. One was written by Arik Sharon, and the other one was written by me, predicting exactly what will happen if we leave Gaza. So what happened with Gaza was not a surprise. The surprise was that Arik Sharon actually did it, because he predicted with great precision what would happen if you pulled out of Gaza, and persisting with this kind of folly of trying to resuscitate a corpse is just going to create greater and greater responsibility. By the way, the whole idea of disengagement from Gaza was that we wouldn't be responsible for it. That's how they sold the whole idea. They sold it that we wouldn't be responsible for it. Now we have to be responsible for it. And you know, people say the siege. The siege is a consequence of Palestinian hostility, not a cause of Palestinian hostility. And so I think as long as we're going to persist with this fatally failed formula of 2 states for 2 people, we are going to wreak tragedy both on Arab and Jew, but apparently particularly on the Arabs.
So, you know, would you agree or disagree? How do you respond? Because I know, obviously, I think you disagree here.
No, we disagree on many things, especially about the interpretation of history and of politics. My interpretation to the situation in Gaza, that we can say 100 times, it's not our responsibility, but it will stay forever our responsibility.
I agree with that.
They are our neighbor. They are our neighbor, and we have to make sure that our neighbor feels good. Otherwise, he will be in war with us. And this is the history of Gaza. Gaza was created by us. I mean, history, we have to understand and also remember that most of the people in Gaza are coming from Palestine in the war of 48. Most of the people in Gaza are coming from Jaffa and from other places the Palestinians ran away. Before that, Gaza was a village. Today, it's the worst situation in the world. And they are our neighbors. So we can't say we don't care about it. It's the responsibility of the Palestinian Authority, the United Nations. No, it's our responsibility. If we want to be in peace with the Palestinians one day, we have to deal with Gaza.
You know, I just must ask one question. What part of they want to kill us are you having difficulty grasping? But I agree with you, it's our responsibility. And the only way to deal with Gaza is not by reconstructing Gaza, but deconstructing Gaza and moving the non-belligerent population out of harm's way to third-party country locations. It is the only way, because the situation is there will either be Arabs in Gaza or Jews in the Negev. There won't be both.
All right, well, we have to move on. So let's turn now to something that residents of the Gaza Strip and the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank can agree on, which is the ongoing hunger strikes in Israeli prisons led by convicted terrorist Marwan Barghouti. An estimated 1,000 to 1,500 Palestinian prisoners joined together with Barghouti since the strike began weeks ago. Citizens and government officials both in the West Bank and Gaza are praising the strike, holding demonstrations of solidarity which can often turn violent.
هذا اليوم أن الشعب الفلسطيني يتحد بمضامين عملية خلف الأسرى في معركتهم في انتفاضتهم في وجه الظلم. دلالات هذا اليوم أنه نحن من 10 سنوات لم تكن الضفة وغزة تشترك في فعالية نضالية واحدة. اليوم هذا تحقق. هذا يدل على أن الشعب الفلسطيني يوحده النضال والمقاومة وتفرقه السياسة.
قضية الأسرى هي قضية أساسية ومركزية عند شعبنا الفلسطيني، ونقول لأسرانا البواسل إن قضيتكم تقف على سلم أولوياتنا ولن يهدأ لنا بال حتى تنالوا حريتكم. ونقول لكم أيها الأبطال يا من تخوضون معركة الكرامة والحرية بأن ما لدى المقاومة من مخزون قادر على تحريركم.
Well, we believe that there is absolutely no reason for this hunger strike. It's quite clear that the Palestinian prisoners in Israeli prisons receive all the necessary conditions. They receive good conditions, and certainly when you compare it to the conditions of Arab prisoners here all over the Middle East. So there is no reason for this hunger strike. And again, this is a political step in order to promote Marwan Barghouti's agenda. We are ready to talk to those prisoners, and there is absolutely no reason for a hunger strike. We have a dialogue with those prisoners. If they want to have better conditions, they can submit their demands or their requests, and the Israeli authorities will decide whether something needs to be changed or not.
So my first question is, what's the likelihood that Israel might actually give in to some of Barghouti's demands? You know, they include 2 visits per month instead of 1, easing of security restrictions on guests, and allowing guests under 16 in free, adding payphones in every wing of the prison, end to solitary confinement, and end to administrative detention, more educational programs, better healthcare, and the list continues. So how much of that is legitimate? How much will be met? What's the reaction? I'll start with you.
Well, the short answer is none of it, because you asked what is legitimate. The short answer is none of it. The security prisoners in large measure are in prison because of the most heinous deeds, and I think it would be a dangerous sign of Israeli weakness to concede and make any concessions to them. And if anything, they should make the conditions harsher to deter any future hunger strikes. I think at some stage Israel has to draw a line in the sand, and if people don't want to eat, well, you know, I mean, I understand that there's a political problem here which goes back to Israel's poor public diplomacy, but I think what Israel should do is publicize as assertively and as widely as possible the heinous deeds that have been committed by these people. And you know, you yourself elaborated on the demands. None of them are life-threatening to deal with life-threatening situations. They're just to make the stay in prison more comfortable. And I don't think that Israel should give in to any of those demands.
How would you deal with this issue?
There are recommendations of the Israeli army and experts in the government about the situation of the prisoners. And I think that we have to look at these prisoners as part of the conflict. They are part of the conflict. They are fighting for their freedom in the prison. That's how we did when we were fighting the British rule here in Palestine. Exactly the same. We have a hunger strike in the British, under the British rule. So we have to consider it as a political act. And the political act can be solved only by a political act. It's not a matter of giving them some of what they want. So I think all in all, it is connected to the situation between us and the Palestinians towards a kind of a process that has to be started. The minute we will start the political process of peace, we will solve the problem of the prisoners.
Well, I mean, so speaking of politics, you know, Marwan Barghouti, who's started this whole thing, is considered a front runner for Palestinian Authority president against Abbas in the next election, but he's serving currently 5 life terms for murder in the Second Intifada, and for the first, arguably. So, you know, how is this even possible? What is he thinking? Why go so far out of his way to make this political statement? Is it for himself, or is it for the Palestinian cause, or you know, is there something greater working?
I think that the minute we will sign peace agreement with the Palestinian Authority, and I'm optimistic, I think it will be soon, Barghouti will be released. He will go out of jail and be the president of the Palestinians if they will choose him.
Would that be a condition? I mean,
no, it's not a condition. It's a fact that the minute we will have peace, we will free Barghouti from jail.
Yeah, well, you know, I would like to remind Professor Amirav, that supposedly we did have a peace agreement with the Palestinians a quarter of a century ago. It was called the Oslo Agreement. And you know how much blood and suffering and trauma and tragedy that brought upon us. But he's right about one thing, it is political. But it's not political between Israelis and Palestinians. It's political between Barghouti and Abbas. I think that Barghouti is sensing the end of Abbas's term, and he's really over 80. How much longer can he continue? And so I think this is a political act trying to bolster his own position. And Israel would do well not to cooperate and give this mass murderer any advantages in his political aspirations.
You know, that actually reminds me, you know, the Israeli security forces, the prisoner services have basically met these demands with indifference. But isn't that just causing more civil unrest?
It's only causing more civil unrest because they expect to win, they expect to succeed. But if it was clear to them that this action will only bring about a worsening of conditions, and they believe that, and Israel could convey this message with credibility, there wouldn't be civil unrest. The civil unrest is driven by expectations of success.
I see. Nah, it looks like you have something you'd like to respond.
No, my only response is that the minute we will start a negotiation and we will have a process going on, we will solve this problem. It's not a real problem, it's a political issue.
But we should include Marwan Barghouti and the prisoners as part of this conversation?
Yeah, I'm sure it's part of the internal politics, Palestinian internal politics, and they are already fighting on the position of who will succeed and who will replace Mahmoud Abbas. And it's legitimate. I mean, we had it too. We know it from examples all over the world. But this is a minor issue. It's not the main issue between us and the Palestinians right now.
All right, well, let's move on to our final topic tonight. 25,000 new housing units have just been approved for construction in Jerusalem. At least 15,000 in the Arab areas annexed by Israel. Despite President Donald Trump asking Netanyahu back in Washington to hold off for a while on settlement expansion, the housing ministry has stated that they've been working on this deal with the Jerusalem municipality for 2 years. Saeb Erekat, the Palestinian Authority's chief negotiator, denounced the plans, saying they were a systemic violation of international law and a deliberate sabotage of efforts to resume talks. Israel took control of East Jerusalem 50 years ago and annexed it shortly thereafter. Ever since, the Jewish state claims a unified Jerusalem as the eternal capital of Israel. Palestinians, however, believe that East Jerusalem rightfully belongs to a future Palestinian state. So my first question, I'm going to start with you, Professor Amirav. What comes next? Riots, protests, UN resolutions? What is the response to this going to be like?
I think many people, including many Israelis, don't understand and don't know even the situation in Jerusalem. It's Jerusalem is Jerusalem, the part that we annexed in 1967, exactly 50 years ago. In this part of East Jerusalem, we settled about 350,000 Jews. Israelis are living now beyond the line, or the Aramistic line. Mm. So they are settlers in East Jerusalem. So what we are doing now, actually, is we continue the same policy, nothing new. The policy is that we consider East Jerusalem as part of the United City of Jerusalem. In the end of the day, we will have to decide what are the borders of the two Jerusalem cities that will be, because East Jerusalem, in the end of the day, will be the capital of a Palestinian state, if a Palestinian state will be established. And all the American presidents, including the one who is right now in office, Trump, say East Jerusalem is under negotiation. We don't want Israel to put facts on the ground. Very soon, I believe that when we come to negotiation, Jerusalem will be number one on the agenda. It's the main problem. It was the problem in Camp David, where I was with Prime Minister Barak. This was the main problem, Jerusalem. It was not the refugees, it was not borders, it was not any other issue but Jerusalem. So you have to see it in the context of the conflict, and when we will come to sit to the table, we will solve the problem with all these houses in East Jerusalem, nothing new about it. We build all the time in East Jerusalem.
So then if we build all the time in East Jerusalem, why is it such an issue to the international community, to everyone?
Because the Palestinians make it as an issue. They say here Israel is annexing. It's a political thing. Everybody knows that we are building in East Jerusalem. We are building all the time. For the last 50 years, we are building houses in East Jerusalem.
Why not build in West Jerusalem? Just, for the sake of argument.
Well, the only reason not to build across the Green Line, is because you want to preserve the option of setting up yet another Muslim majority, homophobic, misogynistic Muslim majority tyranny, whose hallmarks will be gender discrimination, pursuit of homosexuals, and the prosecution of political dissidents. Now, that's the only reason for not building across the Green Line. So unless you actually admit that what you want to do is set up said homophobic, misogynistic, Muslim majority tyranny, there's no reason not to build.
So the idea, is to, in a sense, gentrify the area?
Well, I think that Israel is being a bit hesitant in exerting its sovereignty. At the moment, the political echelons still feel a commitment to preserve the claim of United Jerusalem. But if you remember, 25 years ago, no Israeli government could survive the idea of leaving the Jordan Valley or withdrawing from the Golan, which both were on the table after some time. So I think at the moment that this is more an expression of the needs of the Israeli politicians rather than a assertive expression of Israeli sovereignty.
You mentioned earlier, Professor Amirav, that President Trump is indeed coming to Israel soon. What will his reaction be to this? We have President Abbas who says that he's very supportive, thinks under Trump there will be peace in the Middle East. Doesn't this kind of put
I think
a hammer on his plans?
The Americans were always telling us Israelis not to put facts on the ground that can disturb a possibility of peace in the future. And in this sense, I think that the new American president asked the same thing from Netanyahu. And I think that what we are doing now, Israel is doing now, has nothing to do with the status quo. I mean, the status quo is here. We know exactly what's happening in Jerusalem. Jerusalem, as it was before, is going to be the main issue in the negotiations between the American president and the Israelis and Palestinians. And not like many observers, I'm very optimistic about the possibility that Trump will initiate a process that in the end of the day, we are going to have a settlement with the Palestinians. That's the desire of Palestinians and Israelis, that Trump will be not like the former American president, that Trump will be initiating a new peace agenda, a new peace program. And I believe that he can do it. He can do it.
So if I'm going to understand this correctly, you think that this simply won't really have an effect at all on future peace negotiations?
Definitely.
And that Jerusalem, in the end, will be split no matter what, that it's destined to be divided. Whereas
and we already have the maps. Netanyahu has all the maps, the same maps I saw with the former Prime Minister Barak. And in these maps, we have already the future position of the Palestinian Jerusalem and Israeli. The maps are here.
So yeah, so you're saying that nothing has changed, while Professor Sherman, or Dr. Sherman, you're telling me that they'll give up on it eventually, like they did, like the Palestinian Authority, that they'll give up on it, like they did the Golan, like they.
Well, the Palestinian Authority wasn't related to the
Golan. Had nothing to do with that.
I think the Golan, the dropping of the demand for Israeli withdrawal from the Golan had nothing to do with the Palestinians and nothing to do with the Israelis either.
Example.
I mean, that was just historical happenstance that showed what a good idea it was not to withdraw from the Golan. And I must admit, I haven't seen these maps, but I remember people saying exactly the same thing about Gaza. When we withdraw with Gaza, we'll let them do their thing. We won't have anything to do with it. And so, I'm not quite sure what has to happen until people who are now promoting territorial compromise with the Palestinians admit that they've made a terrible error, which has cost the lives and limbs of tens of thousands of Israelis. And I think that dividing Jerusalem, putting in the Israeli parliament within mortar range, would be a colossal blunder, which history will not forgive the people who made it.
All right, well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today for this edition of ILTV's Israel Weekly. Thanks again to our guests, Professor Moshe Amirav and Dr. Martin Sherman, and thanks to all of you for tuning in. I'll see you next week, and shalom from Israel.